Everyone laughed when Gavin Higgins, a chubby alpha who never fit society's idea of strength, was publicly dumped for a more perfect alpha. But the humiliation caught the attention of Candy Castelli, the most powerful Omega in Chicago, a man feared by criminals, politicians, and businessmen alike. What began as a calculated marriage soon became something neither of them could control. Hi, everyone. I'm the author of today's audiobook. This version has been edited for YouTube. For the raw and censored version with steamy details and more private moments between Gavin and Candy, just open the video description and click the link below. Now, let's begin. Gavin Higgins knew the gala was going wrong before Brady Henderson stepped onto the stage. Brady had spent the evening moving through the Drake Ballroom with Jace Davis beside him, leaving Gavin near the silent auction tables with the clipboard he had carried for most of the night. Gavin had organized half the event while Brady prepared to launch a city council campaign. He had arranged donors, corrected seating disasters, and fixed a catering problem 10 minutes before the doors opened. He had also spent 3 years believing the Omega he planned to marry still wanted the life they had built together. At 27, Gavin was an alpha, but not the kind the Gold Coast crowd celebrated. He was broad through the shoulders, soft through the middle, heavy in the thighs, and visibly chubby in a room full of men who treated fitness club bodies like proof of character. Brady had once called Gavin comfortable while falling asleep against him. Lately, he had used the same word with a thin smile. When the band stopped, Gavin finally understood why. Brady thanked the sponsors, his law firm, and then Jace, a wealthy alpha with a sharp suit, an athletic build, and the kind of family name donors recognized. Then, Brady looked directly at Gavin. "There are moments when a person has to choose the future over comfort," he said. The room went still. Brady announced that the engagement was over, that public life required a partner who could command a room, and that he and Jace had been seeing each other for months. Someone behind Gavin whispered, "About time." Another voice joked that Brady had finally chosen an alpha who looked like one. Heat climbed Gavin's face, but he stayed where he was. He had paid Brady's rent during law school, proofread briefs at 2 o'clock in the morning, and spent months helping build the very event being used to humiliate him. When Brady stopped speaking, everyone waited for Gavin to break. Gavin lifted his clipboard instead. "One question." Brady blinked. "What?" Gavin said. "Did you cancel the caterer's Sunday pickup? Because the deposit is non-refundable, and if you're going to destroy our engagement in front of 500 people, I'd rather not lose $8,000 too." A few people laughed before they could stop themselves. Brady's expression tightened. Gavin set the clipboard down and walked out while he still trusted his legs. Cold October air hit him on the rear terrace. He sat on a low stone wall and pulled the engagement ring from his finger. He was drawing his arm back when a calm male voice said, "Don't." Gavin turned and found Candy Castelli standing beneath the terrace lamp. Everyone in Chicago knew the name. Candy was 33, an Omega, and the head of Castelli Group, a logistics empire with enough rumored criminal connections to make politicians lower their voices when discussing it. He was beautiful in a precise, controlled way, dressed in a dark suit that made him look more like the owner of the building than a guest. Gavin glanced at the ring. "Sentimental," Candy said. "Diamonds have resale value." Gavin stared at him, then laughed once despite himself. Kenny's mouth shifted at one corner. "Better." Gavin asked why he was there. "Watching Henderson turn private betrayal into campaign theater offended me." "That almost sounds ethical." "Don't spread it around." There was no pity in Kenny's expression, and that made Gavin stay. Kenny offered him a ride because Brady's office had arranged Gavin's car. Halfway to the small restoration shop Gavin's family owned in Lincoln Park, Kenny mentioned an antique collection Gavin had authenticated months earlier. Gavin looked over. "You read my report?" Kenny had. Castelli Group had nearly purchased 3 pieces until Gavin identified repairs that changed their value. "My people missed them," Kenny said. "You didn't." Gavin folded his hands over his stomach. "So this isn't charity. I don't do charity at midnight. Your gala donation was $500,000. Tax strategy. Charming. You laughed. At you, not with you. I'll survive." The rhythm came easily enough to irritate Gavin. By the time the car stopped, He still felt humiliated, but Brady no longer occupied every corner of his mind. 2 days later, Kendi asked to meet in a quiet hotel restaurant and slid an 18-month marriage agreement across the table. Gavin stared at it. You really do lead with contracts. They cause fewer misunderstandings than feelings. That may be the saddest thing anyone has said to me this week. And my fiancé dumped me on stage. Former fiancé. Thank you for the update. Kendi explained only what Gavin needed to know. Federal investigators were pressuring Castelli Group, and suspicious art-backed transactions had appeared inside records Kendi normally trusted. Someone might be building a case around him from within. A public marriage to an outsider would stabilize his image, while Gavin's profession gave him a believable reason to examine assets without announcing an internal investigation. You want a husband for optics and an appraiser for camouflage. Gavin said, efficient summary. Why me? Kendi answered without hesitation. Because you're outside my organization, because you're good at your work, and because you corrected Henderson while your heart was being broken. That suggests judgment under pressure. Gavin held his gaze. And because nobody expects Kendi Castell to marry a chubby alpha. Kendi did not flinch from a word. That makes the story unexpected. It does not make you a joke. Gavin's shoulders loosened by a fraction. You say romantic things like a tax attorney. I can improve. Please don't practice on me. The contract gave Gavin his own room, control over his work, the right to refuse public appearances, and a clean exit. It also stated that neither designation gave either man sexual or bonding rights over the other. Gavin read that section twice. You insisted on this. An arrangement only works if neither person has to fear what the other can demand. Gavin took the contract home instead of signing. 3 days later, he returned it covered in edits. Kendi scanned the pages. You changed 17 provisions. 19. You missed 2. Kendi looked up slowly. No one edits my contracts. Then you've been hiring terrible lawyers. Silence stretched. Then Kendi laughed, low and brief. Dinner tomorrow. Bring a pen. Order. Invitation. You're learning. They signed 48 hours later. The engagement announcement hit Chicago on Monday morning. Reporters called Gavin the mystery alpha and an unconventional choice. Brady called 19 times. Gavin answered none of them. That afternoon, Kendi came through the back of the restoration shop and found Gavin examining a damaged Victorian desk. Henderson is calling my office now. Kendi said. Gavin did not look up. Please tell me someone put him on hold. 27 minutes. Gavin finally grinned. I may marry you for that alone. Kendi stepped closer to the desk. You are marrying me, contractually of course. A camera flash burst through the front window as another reporter arrived. Kendi glanced toward it, then back at Gavin. Ready. Gavin set down his flashlight. He had spent years trying not to take up too much space beside Brady. Walking out next to Kendi, he decided he'd start this marriage by making himself smaller. Brady finally appeared in person 3 days after the announcement. Gavin had just locked the restoration shop when Brady stepped from a car at the curb. He looked exhausted rather than polished. And for a second, Gavin saw the law student he used to know. Then Brady said, Tell me this is a stunt. Gavin kept the key in his hand. You made our breakup a stunt. I'm trying something different. Brady's eyes moved over him. Castelli is using you. Maybe. At least he was honest enough to put the terms in writing. Brady flinched. Before he could answer, another car stopped behind him. Kendi got out with Ronan. He did not stride in threatening anyone. He simply came to stand beside Gavin. That restraint unsettled Brady more than a scene would have. You really expect people to believe this? Brady asked. Kendi looked at Gavin, not Brady. Do you want me to answer? The question mattered. Gavin said no. I've got it. He faced Brady. You don't get to humiliate me because you thought I would stay quiet, then complain when I build a life you didn't approve. Brady's mouth tightened. You're making a mistake. Then it will finally be my mistake. Gavin walked past him with Kendi. Halfway to the car, Kendi murmured, I had several excellent threats prepared. Gavin looked sideways. I'm proud of your restraint. Don't be. I'm saving them. The first weeks at Kendi's Lake Forest estate were quieter than Gavin expected. They had separate bedrooms and separate schedules, but somehow kept meeting in the library after midnight. Kenny worked with a glass of scotch beside him. Gavin reviewed art records with tea and complained whenever Kenny spread files across the entire sofa. "This is a 7 feet sofa," Gavin said one night. "You have somehow occupied 9 feet. Leadership. Territorial behavior. You're an alpha. Defend yourself." Gavin took the cushion Kenny had been using and sat on it. Kenny stared at him. Gavin opened his folder. Victory. Kenny went back to work, but Gavin caught the small smile. Those late hours became a habit neither man admitted to arranging. They talked about cases, music, food, and almost nothing about Brady. Gavin discovered Kenny kept old vinyl records and trimmed bonsai in the greenhouse when he could not sleep. Kenny discovered Gavin always served himself last, chose the edge of the sofa, and apologized whenever he needed anything twice. Public appearances were stranger. Kenny had spent years learning how to stand in front of cameras without revealing anything, while Gavin's face reported every opinion before he could stop it. At their first dinner as an engaged couple, a reporter asked whether Gavin had changed his diet for the wedding. Gavin stared at her. Kenny's expression cooled, but Gavin answered first. "Yes, I stopped eating with people who make me lose my appetite." Kenny turned away to hide a smile. In the car afterward, he said, "That was cruel. You sound impressed. I'm trying not to encourage you." Too late. The easy exchanges became more dangerous than scent. Gavin noticed that Candy listened when he spoke, even when he disagreed. Candy noticed that Gavin could make a room laugh without humiliating anyone. Neither trait had anything to do with Alpha or Omega, which was precisely why they began to matter. When a tailor came to fit Gavin's wedding tuxedo, Gavin automatically asked what could be done to make his waist look narrower. Candy, standing by the window, said, "Nothing." Gavin stiffened. Kenny looked directly at him. "The suit should fit you. It should not erase you." Gavin was quiet until the tailor left. "You didn't have to interfere." "No." Candy paused. "That was too personal. It was... I'm sorry." The apology came so quickly Gavin lost the speech he had prepared. "You do that surprisingly well. I practice alone in mirrors." Liar. Obviously, Gavin went to bed thinking about that exchange longer than he wanted to. 6 weeks after the gala, they married in a historic private club under a glass roof instead of the cathedral Candy's public relations team wanted. 200 guests were enough to make the marriage public without turning it into a circus. Brady and Jace attended. Gavin wore midnight green, cut to fit his broad, full body without hiding it. Before the ceremony, Candy entered the dressing room and stopped. Gavin adjusted one cuff. "That expression is concerning." Kenny looked him over, then met his eyes. "You look very good. That's all. Would you prefer a speech?" "Not from you. We have a schedule." Kenny stepped close and straightened Gavin's pocket square. His fingers brushed Gavin's chest, and for one strange second, neither man moved. "Ready?" Kenny asked. Gavin nodded. They had rehearsed the kiss. 2 seconds enough for cameras, nothing more. At the ceremony, Kenny put one hand against Gavin's cheek and paused. He did not pull. Gavin understood the question and leaned in himself. Their mouths met. It should have ended immediately. Instead, Gavin felt Kenny exhale, warm and surprised, and kiss back. Kenny's hand shifted to the back of his neck. Gavin's palm settled at Kenny's waist. The kiss deepened just enough to stop feeling staged before they separated. Later, Gavin cornered him near a service corridor. That was not the rehearsal kiss. Kenny sipped champagne. "I improvised. You're terrible at following instructions. And yet you married me. Legally, you kissed me back." Gavin narrowed his eyes. "You're very smug for an Omega who went off script. I contain multitudes." Gavin walked away before Kenny could see him smile. At the reception, the kiss kept returning in small, inconvenient ways. Kenny would look at Gavin's mouth and then immediately ask someone about a donation. Gavin caught himself standing closer than the photographs required. Brady eventually approached during dinner with Jace several steps behind him. "Congratulations," Brady said, sounding as if the word hurt. Gavin thanked him. Brady's gaze stayed on the ring. "You moved fast." Candy's hand, resting on the back of Gavin's chair, went still. Gavin answered, "So did you. You just started 6 months earlier." Jace looked away. Brady's face colored. Candy waited until they had gone before leaning close enough that only Gavin could hear. I may have married you for your timing. Gavin took a sip of champagne. You married me for forensic accounting with decorative benefits. You are not an accountant. That is what offended you. Candy laughed under his breath. Gavin felt the sound against his shoulder and had to remind himself the room was full of people. 3 days later, Gavin attended a private dinner with Candy's senior people. Silas sat close to Candy, silver-haired and calm, treated with the familiarity of family. Candy had already told Gavin that Silas helped him survive the years after his older brother Adrian died in an ambush. Not everyone at the table welcomed Gavin. One lieutenant nodded toward a Renaissance-style painting brought in as collateral for a major transaction. Maybe the boss's new husband can tell us whether the frame matches the curtains. Gavin rose, walked to the painting, and examined it for less than a minute. It's fake. The laughter stopped. He pointed out a few obvious inconsistencies, then checked the paperwork. The forgery itself bothered him less than the certificate attached to it. This seal belongs to an auction house that closed years ago, but this version of the seal was introduced after it closed. Whoever made these documents had access to real internal records and expected nobody to look closely. Candy's expression changed. An insider. Gavin nodded. For the first time, the man at the table looked at him as something other than Candy's unusual husband. The forged painting gave Gavin a reason to spend more time inside Castelli's legitimate businesses. He visited a warehouse holding art used as loan collateral, reviewed a private collection tied to one of the companies, and found enough irregular paperwork to confirm the problem was systematic. Candy came with him twice and hated waiting while Gavin worked. You have been staring at that invoice for 8 minutes. 7. I timed you. That is deeply unhealthy. Did you find something? Gavin turned the page. I found that someone wants us to think this shipment entered through Montreal. It didn't. The crate label says it did. The wood treatment stamp says it came through New York. Candy studied him. You enjoy this. Finding lies. Being right. Gavin smiled. I married a man who owns half the freight yards in Chicago. I need hobbies. Candy's response was dry, but the pride in his eyes was not. That same evening, Gavin fell asleep in the library with a folder against his chest. He woke sometime after 3 o'clock beneath a blanket he had not put there. Candy was asleep at the opposite end of the sofa, one ankle hanging over the edge, his laptop closed on the floor. Gavin considered waking him, then decided against it. In the morning, Candy denied placing the blanket over him. Ronan did it, he said. Gavin looked toward the security chief, standing 20 feet away. Ronan's expression did not change. Of course, Gavin said. Very nurturing man. Candy his eyes. It was the first morning Gavin realized he was happier in the fake marriage than he had been during the last year of his real engagement. The thought frightened him enough that he went to work early. That discovery pulled Gavin and Candy into the same problem. Gavin traced records. Kenny opened doors. Their arguments became sharper because the stakes were real. Kenny wanted names quickly. Gavin wanted proof before anyone disappeared into a back room. You can't threaten every problem. Gavin told him. Statistically, I can threaten most of them. That is not comforting. It wasn't meant to be. Despite the arguments, trust grew. Kenny started asking what Gavin thought before making decisions. Gavin stopped assuming every act of protection was control. Then one night, a suppressed shot tore through the library window. Candy hit Gavin hard enough to knock him behind the sofa as a second round cut through the chair where Gavin had been sitting. Security flooded the room. Only after the grounds were cleared did Gavin realize Candy's hands were shaking while checking him for blood. The fear turned Candy controlling by sunrise. He canceled Gavin's appointments, doubled guards, and told staff Gavin was not to leave the property. Gavin found out when his driver refused to open the gate. He walked straight into Kenny's office. Remove the order. No, that was not a request. Someone tried to put a bullet through your head. And your answer is to lock me in the house. My answer is to keep you alive. Gavin stepped closer. I married you. You didn't acquire me. Candy's jaw hardened. This is not about the contract. Exactly. It's about whether you respect me when you're scared. That landed. Kenny said nothing for several seconds. Gavin left before the argument could become cruel. The lockdown was lifted the next day, though security remained heavier. Kenny did not apologize with flowers or speeches. He simply stopped making decisions about Gavin without telling him. Gavin noticed. The day after the shooting, their silence lasted through breakfast. Gavin expected Candy to retreat behind orders again. Instead, Candy came into the library while Gavin was packing a work bag. "Ronan will go with you." Gavin waited. Candy added, "If that is acceptable." Gavin looked up. "It is. I dislike this compromise. That is usually how compromise works." Candy nodded once. Gavin zipped the bag. "For what it's worth, I know why you did it. That does not make it right." "No." Gavin hesitated, then touched Candy's wrist. "But you jumped in front of a bullet before you knew where it was coming from." Candy looked at Gavin's hand. "I would do it again." "I know. That's the problem." Their eyes met. Gavin removed his hand before the moment became something neither had agreed to discuss. 5 days later, FBI Special Agent Richard Harlow approached Gavin at the Art Institute. Ronan, Candy's security chief, watched from across the gallery while Harlow slid a thin envelope onto a bench. "I'm investigating your husband," the agent said. "Then speak to his lawyers. Some of the evidence against him is too clean." That made Gavin look at him. Harlow had copies of transaction records carrying Candy's authorization. Gavin recognized the same problems he had seen in the forged painting documents. Details that looked right until someone compared the dates. Harlow did not ask Gavin to betray Candy. He asked him to decide whether the documents were real. "If Castelli is being framed, I want the person doing it," Harlow said. "If he isn't, I want him." Gavin left with the envelope. The pattern led backward instead of forward. Old approvals, dormant companies, rerouted shipments. One name appeared too often. Marrow Consulting Holdings, a company Silas supposedly dissolved years earlier. Gavin followed it 10 years into the past and found a shipment diversion 3 days before Adrian Castelli was killed. He stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Silas had not merely benefited from Candy's rise. He had been positioned beside every disaster that created it. Candy was waiting when Gavin returned home. Ronan had told him about Harlow. Their first argument was ugly. Candy saw secrecy as betrayal. Gavin saw Candy's demand for total access as the same control they had just fought about. Finally, Gavin dropped the files on the library table. "I met him because I wanted to know if the case against you was real." Candy opened the folder. Gavin watched anger leave his face line by line. "No," Candy said when he reached Silas's old company. Gavin said nothing. "Silas handled Adrian's routes. He was the one who got me out after Adrian died." "I know. He raised me." "Then read the rest before you decide I'm wrong." Candy did. The full truth was worse than either of them wanted. The record suggested Silas had helped arrange the ambush that killed Adrian, expecting a young Omega heir to be easier to control. When Candy instead became stronger and more independent, Silas began laying false evidence around him, waiting for the right moment to force him out. Kenny did not rage. He went frighteningly quiet, left the library, and ended up sitting on the greenhouse floor beside a work table. Gavin found him there. "I'm not going to tell you I know how this feels," Gavin said. Kenny gave a hollow laugh. "You were publicly betrayed by the man you intended to marry." "Yes, but Brady is an idiot." Silas was good at this. For the first time that night, Candy almost smiled. Then he looked down. "Why are you still here?" This stopped being a simple arrangement weeks ago. Gavin sat beside him. "Leaving you when you're difficult was Brady's specialty, not mine." Candy turned and kissed him. There were no cameras this time. Candy's hand caught the back of Gavin's neck, and Gavin pulled him closer instead of waiting. The kiss was harder than the wedding kiss, fueled by fear, anger, and weeks of wanting neither man had named. Gavin felt Candy shake once beneath his hand. That was what made him stop. He rested his forehead against Candy's. Candy's breathing was uneven. "Why?" he asked. Gavin brushed his thumb along Candy's jaw. "Not because you're hurt. You think I don't know what I want. I think you do. I want you to choose it when tonight isn't bleeding into everything." Candy stared at him. "You're infuriating. You proposed to me strategically. Your strategy is terrible." This time Candy really did laugh. They stayed on the greenhouse floor until after 2 o'clock in the morning, shoulders touching. Candy confronted Silas carefully after seeing the files, asking about old companies without showing what Gavin had found. Silas answered too smoothly. He blamed dead accountants, archive paperwork, and rivals who had used his name. Gavin watched from the other end of the dining room and saw Candy understand that the man he loved like family was lying to his face. Silas left with a hand on Candy's shoulder, the same familiar gesture he had used at dinner weeks earlier. This time, Candy went rigid beneath it. After the door closed, Gavin asked, "You okay?" Candy stared at the empty doorway. No, it was the simplest, most honest answer he had ever given. Gavin never got the chance to decide when the next kiss should happen. Silas realized someone was closing in and moved first. Brady, whose political plans and relationship with Jace had collapsed after the scandal around Castelli, became an easy tool. Gavin left the restoration shop late one afternoon and noticed the security car behind him was missing only seconds before a van blocked the alley. He fought hard enough to knock one man into a dumpster, but a second attacker caught him from behind. When Gavin woke, his wrists were tied to a metal chair in an abandoned freight warehouse. Brady stood several feet away, pale and restless. "You really do ruin everything," Brady said. Gavin tasted blood where he had bitten the inside of his cheek. Interesting opening from the kidnapper. Brady insisted Candy had destroyed his career and that turning Gavin over would buy him a new life. Gavin looked past him and saw Silas step from the shadows. In that moment, Brady's expression told Gavin the truth. Even he had not understood who was running the plan. Silas wanted Candy at the warehouse angry, armed, and on camera. If Candy slaughtered everyone involved, Silas could hand the footage and the manufactured financial evidence to federal investigators and Castelli's own counsel. The powerful Omega would look exactly like the unstable criminal everyone had been told to expect. Brady tried one last time to hurt Gavin where he used to be vulnerable. "You still think Candy Castelli wants an alpha like you? Look at yourself." Months earlier, the words would have found a wound. Gavin looked at him and answered simply, "He does." Brady actually stopped speaking. Gavin realized he believed it completely. Brady paced while Silas waited with unnerving patience. The more Gavin listened, the clearer the arrangement became. Brady had been promised money and a way out of Chicago. He had no idea Silas had already given Harlow enough anonymous tips to ensure federal surveillance was close to the area. The kidnapping was never meant to succeed as a negotiation. It was theater built for Candy, just as Brady's gala speech had been theater built for Gavin. "You both have the same flaw," Gavin told Silas. "You confuse an audience with control." Silas smiled thinly. "And you confuse being loved with being safe." Gavin's stomach tightened, but he did not look away. "No, Kenny taught me those are different things." Brady scoffed. "Candy taught you?" Gavin turned toward him. "Mostly, he taught me how annoying one man can be before breakfast." It was absurd enough that Brady stared. Gavin used the pause to test the chair legs again. One bolt shifted against the concrete. Not enough to free him, but enough to make noise when he needed it. Outside the warehouse, Candy had already made the choice Silas did not expect. Instead of storming in alone, he brought Ronan, a small security team, and Harlow's federal unit. "I dislike cooperating with you," Harlow told him. Candy checked his weapon. "The feeling is mutual. If you lose control in there, I arrest you too." Candy looked toward the dark warehouse. "Then try to keep up." Inside, Gavin kept Silas talking long enough to hear movement near the loading bay. The lights cut out. Emergency strips flashed red along the floor. One of Silas's men shouted. A shot cracked from above. Then Ronan drove another gunman to the concrete. Federal agents breached the east entrance while Castelli security came through the loading side. Brady panicked. Silas did not. He seemed almost pleased. Candy appeared behind him with a pistol raised. "Step away from my husband." Silas turned slowly. Brady grabbed the back of Gavin's chair, as if using him as a shield could still save him. Gavin kicked backward, knocking Brady off balance. Silas fired. Candy moved. The round grazed his side. Ronan answered, hitting Silas in the arm and sending his gun across the floor. Agents rushed forward, but Candy reached the weapon first. He picked it up and pressed it to Silas's forehead. Everything stopped. Silas looked up through the pain and smiled. "There you are," he whispered. "The boy I made." Candy's finger tightened. Gavin could see exactly what Silas wanted. 10 years of grief, betrayal, and control had been built for this second. "Candy." Candy did not turn. Gavin raised his voice. "Candy, look at me." His eyes moved at last. Gavin's cheek was bruised, his wrist raw, but he kept his voice steady. "He wants you angry. He spent 10 years deciding what kind of man you are. Don't give him my husband." Candy stared at him. Then the weapon lowered. Harlow moved immediately, kicking it away while agents cuffed Silas. For the first time, Silas looked shocked. Ronan cut Gavin loose. Candy crossed the floor and stopped inches away instead of grabbing him. Even then he waited. Gavin closed the distance himself. Kenny's arms came around him so tightly that Gavin almost lost his footing. His face pressed into Gavin's neck. Gavin felt a tremor run through him. "I'm here," Gavin said. "I know." Kenny's voice broke. "I know." Gavin rubbed the back of his head. "You listened." A rough laugh escaped Kenny. "Don't sound surprised." "I'm extremely surprised." Nearby, Brady tried to slip toward an exit and was caught by an agent in 3 steps. He called Gavin's name, asking him to say Silas had forced him. Gavin looked at the man he once planned to marry and felt almost nothing. "You made your own choices," he said. "Live with them." Kenny did not add a threat. He did not need to. At the hospital, Kenny sat beside Gavin's bed and tried to act as if the chair were not too small for his patients. Gavin woke from short sleep and found him studying the bruise on Gavin's wrist. "If you glare at it long enough, it won't confess." Kenny's eyes lifted. "I'm considering options. Against a bruise? Against everyone involved." "There it is." Gavin shifted, wincing. Kenny immediately reached to help, then stopped before touching him. Gavin held out his hand. Kenny took it. The difference was small, but Gavin felt it. "Silas wanted you to prove he knew you." Gavin said. "You didn't." Kenny looked down at their joined hands. "Because you asked me not to." "No, because you chose not to." Kenny's thumb moved once across Gavin's knuckles. Neither man called it love yet. They did not need to. The following days passed through a blur of medical checks and statements. Gavin had a mild concussion and bruised wrists. Kenny had a shallow graze along his ribs. Silas survived to face the evidence Gavin and Harlow had assembled while the federal case built on Silas's fabricated records began to collapse. On the 4th evening, Gavin returned to the Lake Forest estate. His mother had offered to take him back to Lincoln Park. Gavin told her he was already going home, then realized what word he had used. Kenny was sitting on the edge of the bedroom with the original marriage contract in his hands. Gavin stopped in the doorway. "That looks ominous." Kenny did not smile. "The reason I asked you to marry me is gone. My companies will survive. Silas is finished. You nearly died because you were tied to me." Gavin's chest tightened. Kenny continued. "You fulfilled everything you promised. I can terminate the agreement and make sure you have whatever you need." For 1 second, Gavin wanted to shout. Then he understood. Kenny was afraid again, so he was deciding first. Gavin crossed the room, took the contract, and tore it in half. Kenny stood. "Gavin." Gavin tore it again. "You're doing it again." "Doing what?" "Deciding what I want without asking me." Kenny stared at the pieces in Gavin's hands. Gavin dropped them onto the floor. "Now ask." Kenny swallowed. The most feared man Gavin had ever met suddenly looked uncertain. "What do you want?" Gavin stepped closer. "My shop. My work. The left side of the library sofa. No surprise lockdowns." "No guards," added without a conversation. Kenny's mouth almost moved. "Anything else?" Gavin rested a hand against his chest. "Yes. You." Silence held for 1 heartbeat. Candy said, "Stay." Gavin smiled. "Better. Will you?" "I already did." Candy kissed him before Gavin could make another joke. And this time neither of them had a contract to hide behind. Gavin pulled him close. Candy's hands settled around his waist. And the tension they had carried since the wedding finally stopped being theoretical. They moved slowly enough to keep choosing each step, laughing once when Gavin accused Candy of still trying to control the pace. Later, when Candy touched the scent gland at Gavin's neck, he stopped and waited. Gavin answered by turning his head and drawing him closer. The bond they exchanged was mutual, deliberate, and entirely theirs. Gavin marked Candy only after Candy asked for it, and Candy returned the mark with the same certainty. The rest of the night belonged to them, private and unhurried, with no cameras, no strategy, and no one else's expectations in the room. Morning found them still in the same room, with torn contract pages scattered near the bed and sunlight reaching across the floor. Gavin woke first and watched Candy sleep for several seconds before Candy opened one eye. "You're staring." Professional assessment. Of what? Whether powerful omegas snore. Candy opened the other eye. "I do not snore. That is not what your husband heard." Candy reached for a pillow. Gavin caught it before it hit him. The easy foolishness of the moment affected him more than he expected. There was no deadline hanging over them now, number 18-month exit date, and no public reason they had to remain married. Candy seemed to understand the same thing. His expression softened. "Still staying?" he asked. Gavin set the pillow aside. "Ask me again, and I'm charging by the question." Candy pulled him closer instead. Gavin let himself be held. For years he had thought security meant making himself useful enough that someone would keep him. This felt different. He could disagree with Candy, irritate him, refuse him, walk away from a room, and still be wanted when he came back. That was the part of the marriage no contract could have promised. 3 months later, Gavin opened Higgins Providence and Risk Consulting above the family restoration shop. He refused Candy's offer to buy the building, accepted an upgraded alarm system after an argument, and sent Castelli Group an invoice for its first forensic audit. Candy called within 2 minutes. "You charged me above market rate." Gavin leaned back at his desk. "Husband surcharge. That is not a real category. It is now. I want an itemized explanation. You can book a consultation." Candy hung up on him. Gavin laughed for almost a minute. Nearly a year after the night Brady humiliated him, Gavin returned to the same Gold Coast ballroom for another charity event. This time he was invited because a museum board wanted his opinion on an acquisition. People came to him before they came to Candy. Gavin noticed the difference without needing to enjoy it too much. Candy stayed nearby, but did not hover, speaking with donors while Gavin handled his own conversations. Later they met beside the windows. "You abandoned me," Candy said. "You seemed capable of survival." "Barely." Gavin glanced across the room and saw Brady under the watch of his attorney near the exit. Brady looked back. Gavin felt nothing worth carrying home. "People are staring," Gavin said. Candy followed his gaze around the ballroom. "Am I alpha? At you?" "No. I've been boring for years." Candy looked Gavin over with open satisfaction. "You're the interesting one now." Gavin smiled. "Smug Omega." "Very." Candy leaned in and kissed his temple. It was small and easy. Nothing like the staged wedding kiss or the desperate one in the greenhouse. Gavin took his hand. He had once believed love meant becoming easier to display, easier to manage, easier to choose. Candy had believed love meant controlling every danger before it could take someone away. Neither belief had survived the year. Their designations had shaped the pressure around them, but they had not done the work of loving each other. That had come from arguments, trust, bad jokes, difficult choices, and the decision to stay when leaving would have been simpler. Gavin tugged Candy toward the auction tables. "Come on." Someone mislabeled a French commode as Italian. Candy sighed. "Scandalous. I knew you'd understand. Will there be champagne?" "If you behave." Candy followed him anyway. Gavin laughed, taking up exactly as much space as he wanted. Gavin entered Candy's world as the alpha everyone underestimated, but he left the story as the one man Candy chose without contracts, strategy, or fear. Thank you so much for listening and staying with Gavin and Candy until the very end. If you want the complete raw version with the full slow burn, extended romantic scenes, steamy and censored moments, and more private details that were removed from this YouTube edit, you can find on my Patreon. Just open the description below this video and click the Patreon link to read the full version. Thank you again for supporting my stories, and I'll see you in the next one.